At some point in almost every entrepreneur's journey, the same question eventually shows up. When should I quit my real job and pursue this business full time? You've got the idea. Maybe you've started working on it nights and weekends. Maybe you've even picked up a few early customers. And eventually that thought just kind of creeps in. What if I just quit and go all in? Because quitting your job to start a business, well, it'll feel exciting. But it can also be one of the riskiest financial decisions you'll ever make. Here's the problem. A lot of people quit at exactly the wrong time. Not because the business idea is even bad, but because they left their job before all the pieces were in place. Some people jump too early and they create enormous pressure. Others stay in their job so long that the business kind of stalls out. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what should realistically be true before you quit your job. We're going to talk about why that decision should be based on benchmarks and not just emotions, and the mistake I've seen people make when they leave way too early. Hi there, I'm Matt. I've spent over 25 years building companies as a serial entrepreneur and helping small business owners navigate challenges and avoid costly mistakes. On this channel, I try to answer the questions entrepreneurs have, from initial idea to first dollar and beyond, using real-world experience instead of startup motivational hype. Before we get too far into this, if you're watching this video, I'm curious, would you quit your job to start a business, or would you try to build it on the side? Let me know in the comments. I'm always curious how people approach that decision. So let's talk about some framework I like to use. I set up a few very specific benchmarks that should usually be true before I go all in. One mistake I see people make all the time is treating the decision like an emotional moment. They're frustrated at work, they have a bad week, or they get all excited about a new business idea, and suddenly it's like, I'm done, I'm quitting. That's usually a mistake. If you're serious about building a real business, the decision to leave your job should be very systematic, not emotional. Ideally, you decide in advance what needs to be true before all of that happens. You write it down, you lock it in, and you have specific benchmarks that have to happen before you walk away from your paycheck. Maybe it's a certain amount of revenue. Maybe it's a specific number of customers, or a financial runway in your savings, or a clear specific evidence that the business is actually growing. But the key is this: quitting your job shouldn't be a reaction to a bad week. It should be the result of a plan you made months earlier. Once those benchmarks are met, well, then the decision becomes kind of ho-hum. The first benchmark I always like to see is pretty simple. The business needs to show real signs of life. That means something beyond just excitement and adrenaline. Real indicators like, you have actual customers paying you and people asking for your product and service. You have repeat business and referrals are starting to happen. Good old word of mouth. If you're still pre-revenue, quitting your job usually increases pressure without increasing your chances of success. In fact, for most early entrepreneurs, their job is the best startup investor they'll ever have. It funds the early stages while the business proves itself, especially before your first dollar. You need that job to keep funding the experiment that is your business. But eventually, something interesting can start to happen. The business starts working. Customers are showing up and opportunities start appearing. And suddenly the problem isn't whether the business will work. The problem becomes something else. Do you actually have enough time to grow it? That's another strong signal that it may be time to quit. When your job is what's holding the business back, you're turning down opportunities. You can't respond to customers fast enough. Your schedule is packed because you're literally juggling two worlds. At that point, the question starts shifting from, will this business work, to how big could this become if I gave it my full attention? And that's a very different situation. Before someone quits their job, there's another benchmark that's easy to overlook: personal financial runway. Because even if the business is working, and even if your time is the bottleneck, you still need to be able to cover your life while things are transitioning. Ideally, that means having somewhere in the range of 3 to 6 months of personal expenses saved and locked away, or at least another reliable way to cover your household costs if the business doesn't cover them right off the bat. Because once your paycheck disappears, the pressure shows up immediately. And when that happens, it changes how you make decisions. Instead of building the business strategically, you start asking, how do I make money this month? How can I pay my bills? And those are very different decisions. A short runway doesn't just increase risk, it completely changes your behavior. Even with some runway in place, quitting your job will multiply financial pressure. And that stress is one of the fastest ways to make bad decisions. Before leaving a steady paycheck, you should understand things like how long your savings will support you, how long the business might realistically take to produce dependable income, and what your fallback plan looks like if things take longer than expected. Because once the paycheck disappears, the clock starts ticking. The goal isn't eliminating risk. I mean, that's impossible. The goal is avoiding panic decisions 6 months later. There is something most startup advice never talks about. Quitting your job just doesn't affect you. It affects your entire household, your spouse, your schedule, your stress level, your kids, your financial stability. And if the people closest to you aren't aligned with the decision, this can create serious tension at exactly the moment you need their support the most. The best situations I've seen are when everyone understands the risks and the timeline and what the next year or two might realistically look like. Let me show you what this can look like when someone quits too early. I know a local boutique owner who started her shop while still working a full-time job. She worked nights and weekends, and little by little, the business really started growing. I mean, customers were coming in, things were looking promising, and it felt like momentum was really there. Around that same time, there was a management change at her day job. She didn't get along with the new boss as well, and, well, she made the leap. Completely jumped off the cliff, quit her job, and decided to focus on the shop full time. Unfortunately, she hadn't taken all the factors into account. She didn't have much in the way of a personal runway, and the business suddenly had to support her entire household. Within a few months, the pressure really started ramping up. And eventually she realized she needed to go back to work. So she found another job. It took a few more years before she felt confident enough to try it again. But this time the decision looked very different. She had clear milestones she had hit. She had a better financial runway in place, and she knew the business could realistically support the decision. That second leap wasn't based on some kind of an emotional response or frustration. It was based on proof. Now, after hearing all of that, this might sound like I'm saying you should never quit your job. And that is not the case at all. There absolutely are moments when quitting your job makes perfect sense. The business is working. Customers are coming in. The demand is real. Your time is the bottleneck. You've got a personal runway to cover expenses for a while. And continuing to split your attention between two worlds is slowing everything down. I mean, at that point, quitting your job isn't reckless. It's simply the next logical step. You've hit your milestones, and the conditions you defined are finally true. If you've ever quit a job to start a business, what made you decide it was time? Was it the revenue or the demand, or just a moment where you knew the opportunity was real? I'd love to hear your experiences down in the comments. Let's talk about them. Quitting your job to start a business can be one of the most exciting decisions you ever make as an entrepreneur. But ideally, it isn't based on emotion. It's based on benchmarks you defined ahead of time and wrote down before the decision ever had to be made. The business is showing signs of life. The demand is real. You understand and have a financial runway, and your household is prepared for the transition. When all of those pieces start lining up, the leap becomes a lot less about hope and a lot more about timing. Because quitting your job shouldn't be an emotional leap. It should be the moment when the plan you wrote down months ago finally proves itself. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to see the new episodes as they drop every single week. And if you're thinking about starting a business, or you're still pre-revenue and trying to figure out the right next step, this channel is here to help you think through the decisions that come early in the journey. Now, take a breath. You got this. All right. What's next?